the dauntless. She just stays in bed. She doesn't know why this thought seems so odd, but she just stays in bed, snuffles into the pillow and wraps the blankets around her tighter. She drifts deeply into sleep before being woken up by a deep grunt and a buzzing in her nose. She opens her eyes and notices she's cocooned herself in her blankets before snoring loud enough to wake herself up. She hadn't done that wait, when did she stop? The mental conundrum gets her actually thinking and not sleeping, and she tries to sit up and then squirms at the wrappings she's tied herself into. The blankets are unfamiliar. They're made of cotton and a warm orange that she can never remember sleeping in. Now thoroughly confused, she manages to untangle herself and finds that the pillow is trapped inside her antlers, which is just odd, weren't they? Where is she? The room is very plain, a single simple bed which she's laying in and a cabinet and wardrobe to the side. She pulls at the bedding to untangle herself a little more, and it outright tears in her grip. That should not have happened. What is going on? Her head feels like it's been stuffed with pillows and she wants to sleep more, but something is up and she has to get to the bottom of it. She untangles herself entirely and stands up. The walls are pale blue and the floor covered with a soft tan carpet. She moves to stand and the action is completely flawless, easy beyond anything she can remember, which is weird, so she reaches down and sees the mass of flesh hanging off her chest. Her breasts are enormous. What's going on? She takes a step, but she's in perfect balance. It's flawless, it's easy. She lets her arms fall to her side and she feels hard muscle. Rock hard, no, steel hard muscle. She feels her stomach and finds abs on the abs of her abs. Her arms are bulging with power barely concealed by the shaggy fur her father gave her. Her legs are pillars of muscle that cord together into impossibly powerful limbs. She feels her neck and can tell that she would be able to carry 3 people at least in her antlers, and the antlers. They used to be 2 small, cute points apiece. Now there's a rack and she slowly counts out the branches. I'm a 10-point carib. How? Wait, what's that? She asks, feeling her antlers until she notices what feels like a small rubber ball on the end of a point. She quickly feels around and notices they all have one, and they pluck off after a little effort. A tiny pink ball, but why? She reaches up to feel the point she pulled the ball from and then pulls her questing hand and finger back with a gasp. She's bleeding. Her antlers have been sharpened to needle points, but why? The door opens and she turns around in shock. Standing in the doorway and looking as surprised as she is perhaps the 3rd man she's ever seen in person. He's a Tret in a formal, military-looking uniform. Strong jaw, deep brown eyes, and his skin has a flurry of brown freckles across it. His short hair is a shiny copper, and he quickly goes from surprise to calm as he smiles at her. She can feel her heartbeat accelerate. Interesting timing for you to wake up while I'm using the facilities. How are you feeling, ma'am? He asks gently. 1,000 questions pour through her mind before settling on a simple and obvious one. Who are you? She asks, and he nods. Corporal Robert Wise. As to the other obvious questions, you're in a patient recovery room on the Dauntless, a moderately sized first contact vessel made by my race, the humans, for proper first contact. You're here because in the midst of an operation to try and resist a very dangerous criminal, you were injured and we were able to effect your rescue while also healing you of your wounds. Robert explains, and she can feel a flush of fear go through her. What happened to me? She asks, and he sighs. Please sit down, Miss Clatterhooves. I'm about to deliver some very bad news, Robert says, and she lowers herself to the bed. The Umbral organization hurt you. They've been hurting you for 15 years straight, and we managed to free you just last week. It doesn't hit her all at once, but instead it slowly builds as the sheer enormity of what he just said to her starts sinking in. 15 years. She mutters as it really starts to sink in and her eyes water. Then she starts to cry. It all suddenly makes sense. Her changes, her confusion, her everything. She doesn't remember how she got here because she wasn't what they brought here, but something else using her body. Something that had turned her into a monster, a freak. A gentle hand touches her shoulder and she looks up to see Robert meeting her gaze. She grabs him and pulls him close to begin crying anew. She needs someone. She needs anyone willing to be there for her. And that he returns the hug and whispers gently that she'll be all right is what she needs. She doesn't know how long she was crying or when she started babbling in the midst of all of it. He doesn't try to pull away or seem bothered by her strength. When she moans about her family and everything she lost with them, he assures her that his superiors were speaking to them and they were coming to make sure she was all right. Bringing up her friends isn't as comforting, but he swears he'll help her as best he's able. Wondering about the horrible things she must have done has him squeeze her hard and assure her that none of it is her fault. No one sane or sober would ever disagree. That she's a freak is countered with him, assuring that she's just in really, really good shape, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Then a loud growling noise cuts everything off and she goes still. It repeats itself and she realizes it came from her stomach. She's ravenous. "How about some lunch? Will that help?" Robert asks, and she nods. After a few minutes, he tries again. "You're going to have to let me go if we're going to get lunch, Miss Clatterhooves." Sorry, She stammers as she lets him go, and he stands upright before straightening his uniform somewhat. "You've been through a lot. I understand," he says before offering her his hand. "It's going to get better, I promise." He helps her up and guides her out of the room and then down the hallway. The ship they're in is massive, and he guides her to a small side kitchen and dining room. He quickly pulls out a large amount of vegetables that she recognizes from across several words, many of them with a little sticker stating that says they were grown on Centris. He asks for her advice a few times, and soon enough, there's a large salad in front of her with a large glass of water. She tries a nibble at first, then begins to borderline inhale the stuff, prompting Robert to stand up and fetch a series of familiar fruits and lay them out in a bowl next to her salad. "You probably have a fair few questions, so I'll begin speaking and hopefully answer them. Now you no doubt have some questions as to what's going to happen next. Long story short, we're putting you into witness protection. We're going to be helping relocate you so that anyone from the Umbral organization that actually could recognize you will be very, very far away. We have several worlds and stations to place you, including spires distant from the ones you both grew up on and where you were found here on Centris. This will include a new name and a little bit of surgery to disguise you somewhat," he explains as she works her way through the salad and starts in on the fruit. "Will you be wanting some nuts and beans with those?" She nods and he stands up to fetch a large bag of nuts that he pours into a bowl and warms up some beans for her to eat. "So if you could take a moment to both catch your breath and actually swallow your food, you could then tell me if you have any more questions." "Sorry, it's just, I've never been that hungry before." "You were in restorative coma. We kept your nutrient levels up, but we didn't want to risk you choking. So you're fine health-wise, but your stomach was completely empty," Robert says. "Which is why you're only getting a small bowl of nuts and beans. Overeating is a problem. Take your time and savor this meal." She follows his advice, and rather than quickly pulping and swallowing the flesh of the fruit she was already mostly finished with, she takes a slow bite and slowly chews. The sweetness brings to mind tall trees in warm and wet places. "So," she begins after a few minutes of slowly chewing her way through the fruit and draining the glass of water twice. "You're not a Tret?" "Not at all," he says with his tone so dry that Holly wonders if she offended him. "The resemblances between human and Tret are skin deep at most, so much so that this is a special kitchen for non-human herbivores and vegetarians. Our toxin and poison resistances are so high that we consider a lot of deadly things to be mere flavorings." which, as you've already guessed, made for an entertaining first contact. A spiced chicken dinner after dinner, mints and coffee were all considered highly dangerous poisons, chemical weapons, and dangerous stimulants, all part of a healthy diet to humans. A few giggles escape her before she can fully process the silly and yet completely serious situation. Oh dear, I'm sorry. This has got to be just the worst kind of posting for you. How did you come to that conclusion? Robert asks gently. I mean, well, I don't know what it's usually like among humans. Few do. But you've been through the training to get an officer position and put on a uniform, and now you're being asked to babysit some baby-fied criminal muscle freak, and she trails off in her self-depreciation, and he sighs. Things are very different with humanity. Being asked to keep an eye on and offer what support I can to a traumatized victim of organized crime is a very easy job, especially considering that we're in the middle of the Dauntless, and anyone trying anything funny would have to go through a dozen checkpoints, and even if they tried anything, well, let's just say I'm ready for action. But, I mean, really? One of the only guys on a ship just to babysit me? Isn't that a bit much? Holly asks, and Robert snorts in amusement. Miss Clatterhooves, humans are the only currently known spacefaring 100 to 100 race in the galaxy. Men are the warriors and workers of humanity. Almost every soldier aboard this vessel is a man. I'm just a random soldier standing guard. Since no one's come in to relieve me, I'm guessing they like my bedside manner, so duty continues. Robert explains, pointing to a somewhat hidden camera in the corner of the room looking at both of them. Humans have lots of men? Holly asks in stunned silence. A man for every woman, Robert says blithely. You know, you're kind of cute. I'm flattered, but I think you should reconnect with your family before trying to start a new one. Does my mother still want to see me? Holly asks. Very much so. She outright threatened the soldiers, explaining things if they didn't tell her the moment you woke up. In fact, I'm mostly just keeping you calm and stalling for time as she races here. Robert explains before pulling out his communicator and examining its screen. T-minus 2 minutes until arrival. What? She's racing here fast and hard to the point that other soldiers are opening doors before she even enters the hallways. She'll be here really soon. Robert remarks with a grin as he reads that some of the guys are being reprimanded for cussing as they dodge out of the way of the charging Carib by the woman herself as she races for them both. Really? Holly asks, and Robert nods. Oh yes, there's a good reason I've been trying to stay well away from the doorway. Your mother's coming fast and hard, and heaven help anyone who costs her even a millisecond of time. In spite of all that's happened, you are still well and truly beloved by her and your family. He remarks before glancing down at his communicator as it vibrates. The sound of hooves slamming into the deck just outside the room causes Holly to turn in disbelief. Robert slips around her, opens the door, and steps outside while gesturing into the room. He then dodges the charging Carib and grins as Holly is tackled into a hug. My little Holly, they told me everything. Mommy's here. She's so sorry she wasn't able to help you, but I'm here now. You're going to be okay, I promise. I will not fail you again. You're going to be just fine, and... Mother Clatterhooves starts babbling as Robert leans into the room to close the door. I'll be just outside if you need me. Take your time. He assures them even as Holly returns the hug and starts babbling back. All told, it takes roughly 2 hours before the door opens again.